Now, here we go. Are we live yet?
When I say now, I click the thing and then there's a couple of seconds of delay. So yes.
Well, yay. Alright, well, now we are live and welcome to another Candid Tales post-show story chat. Today we are talking about Tailc, son of Treon. So we're going to be hopefully joined by Oisin in a half an hour to chat about the music of this one. But this is an interesting, well, it's a mad week. It's a beautiful sunny day outside. I hope you're able to get outside and walk around a little bit. If you're near the seaside, I hope you can go for a swim. If you're not, that's all right. Hope you can just stare at the sun for a bit. We're going to be talking about this story in a couple of minutes. But first of all, Sorcha, this was a bit of a mad week, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like every week is a bit of a mad week at the moment, to be honest. Like, it's just all a bit weird.
Well, I mean, this week we would have been in our schedule, in our calendar for Candid Tales, we would have been ending this weekend actually a kind of a little bit of a festival tour to kick off festival season, which is definitely not going to happen this year because that's not going to happen. So it hit me last week. I was like, oh man, we were supposed to be going to a Féile Bealtaine down in Dingle, followed by Galway Theatre Festival, followed by the Hill at Ishnuk, and Marty Mulligan was going to have us up there and telling stories and lighting the fire. And that was going to be an amazing week, and I was really looking forward to it. And of course, that's not happening. But this week has been mad for a couple of other reasons. Because this morning, Saturday, at the 9th of May, there was a darkness into light at sunrise, and I was just seeing loads of beautiful pictures, beautiful comments, raising money for Pay the House and raising money for suicide awareness. And it's a great thing to be doing, and I think everyone I know and certainly has been touched in some way by suicide, so it's a fantastic thing for mental health and awareness to be raising money and looking at the dark and the light, because we've just left the dark half of the year going into the light half of the year. That's another thing that happened on Tuesday night in the Hill of Ishnuk. Somebody lit the fire to spread around, and everyone tried to light fires as well and have the kind of light heart of the year celebration in their own homes a little bit. And I guess there was a little bit of sadness because one of the first businesses of popular, I guess, what's the word? I don't know. It's something that has been in people's minds this week. Bewleys on Grafton Street in Dublin city centre has closed, and the only reason I mention it is because I was working there as a greeter, and I really enjoyed working there, and it brought me closer to Harry Clark windows, to Jim Fitzpatrick amazing beautiful window of Cruton and one of Cuchullin's lovers, and it was a fiance. I thought it was Cuchullin's. Oh. Well, we'll have to tell that story now. And that closed down, and I was very sad. But I'm asking people to help us find sources, because we're going to be talking about sources and the difficulty of telling stories without multiple sources in a little bit. But this week has been kind of a bit light and a bit dark. There's been light days and dark days, and I guess there's casualties in all of this, and one of the first businesses to show a casualty or have become a casualty of this whole COVID thing has been Bewleys. I'm sure there'll be many more. I know that we are struggling as artists and performers not to have gigs, and many others are as well, and it's a bit of a mad time and a mad week. But I guess there is light at the end of the tunnel. Everybody is reshaping, regrafting and reorganising themselves to be online and do stuff like this, and I don't know. I guess it's not all dark, it's not all pessimistic, and there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And when it's so sunny and full of summer, I kind of feel like, all right, you know what, it can't be all bad. Let's look at the positivity. Let's look at the good side of this. So that's my rant of weekly updates. That's it. That's it. Done. Okay, I'm done.
You're done. Cool.
Oh, wait.
No, you're not.
I forgot to mention
you wanted to say.
The other great thing. The other amazing, heartwarming, kind of cry because I read it thing, which was the relief funded campaign for the Navajo and Hopi families because they need it, and they were a Native American tribe that needed a lot of help because they were basically just in the pits and needed some serious help for this
they've
COVID
been
situation.
hit particularly hard, as a lot of marginalised communities have in the States and around the world. And the people of Ireland decided to repay a favour, which was something quite touching. There's a monument to it down in Middleton. The Choctaw people of Native America of America sent $170 in famine relief during the Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, and they didn't have any money to spare, and it was very sweet, and it was very touching. And they're being hit really, really hard by COVID. And so there's a GoFundMe now. And a lot of Irish people are sending relief to... I'm not sure why they're not sending relief to the Choctaw tribe. I'm not sure if there is an organisation there to send relief to, or if this is some dumbassery. But
it's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful.
It's just Irish people getting very confused by the whole situation and not really sure which tribe it was that gave them money in the first place. It doesn't matter.
I don't know if that's what it is. I don't know if that's what it is. I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, we are sending Irish people are sending relief to the Navajo and Hopi nations, which is just really nice.
Because I was a little bit confused. It's like, the Choctaw people gave us money, so we're giving money to the Hopi. Wait a second, what?
Wait, what?
But anyway, that doesn't matter.
I don't know.
It's beautiful.
Hopefully,
hope you've donated.
Hopefully, it's the thought that counts,
and it's amazing.
And hopefully, it's getting to the people who need it.
Yeah, but one of the things I read was like that the people who set up this fundraiser, was because a lot of the elders in the tribes still had the customs. They were the ones who had the language. They were the ones who had the stories and the belief systems, and they weren't necessarily being passed on. And so when one of the elders dies in a community, a library dies. And I was like blown away by that, because I guess like I was just listening to Eddie Lenihan as well during the week, and talking about his source of collecting stories from the elders and how much there is, and how much they're just in a library. And we have a father who's probably going to be listening to this, who has a library in his own brain, and I don't know how many stories will go on with him when he like doesn't pass them on or write them down, Tony, write a book. Anyway, sorry, slight tangent, but I mean, like, it was kind of beautiful to think that the source of their connection to their traditions was an oral tradition that hasn't necessarily been passed down, but is been trying to be kept alive. So anyway, I thought that was beautiful, and it was a nice light through the dark type thing, as this day kind of stands for.
So Tailc, son of Treon, is the story that we're talking about. Now that we've I know. Remember when we were like, let's not spend too long on it, and then it was 10 minutes. Anyway, it's fine.
I mean, I got excited. The whole Navajo thing was, it's very emotional. I mean, this story is a bit emotional. It's a topsy-turvy one. We're on the Fianna, and we've been talking about the Fianna for a while, and this story crept up, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to tell it because it's mental, but I thought it might be a nice precursor to telling the Battle of Entry, because it has a couple of little similarities to it, and it has this bad guy who's basically a giant cat, or he's a cat head and a cat tail, giant cat, and cat head monsters come up in the Battle of Entry as well, and dog heads. But I guess to really briefly summarise the story, a woman comes in search of help from the Fianna, and Fionn sounds the door to Fiann when he hears that her husband, or the man she's been cursed and bound to, is Tailc, son of Treon, a giant cat with an army who's following her, and he helps her stand against him. Of course, 1,000 men die by Tailc, son of Treon. Eventually they kill Tailc, son of Treon, the cat dude, and a few avenge cycles happen. 2-3 more guys try and like avenge Tailc, son of Treon, and then the wife does, and there's a big lament, and it's all very sad until finally they win the battle. They beat everyone off Ireland's shores, and they turn to the woman that started this whole thing, asking Fionn for help, and she turns around and she dies, just like that.
Yep.
So
we had some interesting kind of conversations about this one, because this was one that, like, it as you say, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster, and it goes through so many kind of mood changes, that this is the kind of thing that works really, really, really well in a live show, and is something that we have a lot of fun with live, because in a live performance, it's really it's kind of one of our things now at this point, to really kind of handle those tone shifts, and to kind of like go from funny to sad to exciting, and like to take people on that kind of journey. And it's something that's a lot more difficult when you're telling a story into a microphone for a podcast. Like, it's a very different thing. And I definitely struggled with that with the same issue when I was talking or when I was telling the Hunt of Slieve Gullion last week, and another new story this week that'll be coming out soon. It's a different situation. So maybe talk a little bit about how you got on with it. Because I know the point at which you kind of like called me for a 3-hour conversation. But like, what happened before that?
Like, it's really interesting. I think the next time we have a live show, I'll definitely do this story, because it'll be the first time that we'll ever have done the process in reverse. Every single one of our podcasts up to date have all been episodes, bar your one, of course. I just had personal experience last week. So this week I had personal experience of not telling a story live, and this time it will be doing a podcast to kind of to sort out the teething problems with it, because it's different to writing a story. The flow of an oral story needs to have certain highs and lows, and have certain pauses to allow you to listen to it. And I think this story would have been a lot of crack live, because you can play up the big fight between Oscar and Tailc and Treon, and it goes on for 5 days and 5 nights until Oscar finally kills Tailc and Treon. And let's leave a big long silence there as we look at people who are listening. The melody can keep on going, and then I can wait and judge when to come in with the next series of kind of ridiculous, funny, hilarious events that would have been funny with a live audience, but
just definitely
we would have played that for laughs.
Yeah, sure.
That's not necessarily the traditional way of telling the stories. It's just like, we definitely do that when something goes like really ridiculous. We will tend to play it for laughs, because it's just kind of, that's our style. We'll find the humour where we can.
I think playing for laughs is something that, you know, is cataclysmic and can be terrible, and like, I think you should not do in live performances, play something for a specific laugh. But I think when you end up seeing something that is like, one guy comes up and asks for retribution, and then he gets killed, and then his sons come up for ask for retribution and they get killed, and then his wife comes up, and it's just like, all right, like, and it's a bit ridiculous. Now, the other problem that I had with this is because I was only using one source, a Lady Gregory source, and I had zilch nada, no other source for other information, no other interpretation to pull it apart and go, oh, actually that's not the important bit, this is something that's more important. Whereas she has so much information, it's kind of, I recorded it 3 times, and eventually I called you, was like, all right, I can't, I don't know what story I'm telling here, and I'm trying to tell 5 different stories in one go, and I had to pull it apart. And I guess we do this with the live shows anyway, you know, we pull it apart before in rehearsal in our you know, community of how we do it, and then we finally get to a point where we can test it in a live audience, and then maybe the next time we do it, it's a bit tighter, and we go, oh wait, actually I needed to do that, or you give me that bit of feedback, or I give it to you, and then it works. And musically we find it as well, we might hit a beat and go, oh, that was actually wrong there, it's not actually that funny, we need to play that kind of somber and allow it become funny, or whatever it is, you know, we find it in the live, and then we can more easily do it in the podcast.
That's the bit that I think is important, is the finding it in the live. And that's kind of a really key part of our process, is actually like, and that's why, you know, we always have that kind of little bit of disagreement, tension. I don't know if it's quite a disagreement, but we always have a little bit of a push-pull about how much rehearsal to do, especially with a new story. And like, on one level, you have to rehearse if you have like more than 2 performers. You don't have to rehearse if you have one storyteller and one musician and they both know what they're doing, by the way. Like, we've done that before, where we'll go and like do it very spontaneously and very organically. And like, I really, really heavily favour, especially with a new story, under rehearsing it so that you can find those moments in the live. Because I think that you'll never write something better than what will come to you when you're on stage. You just won't. It's a different form of creativity. And that's why I really resist sometimes rehearsal. Because I just think it's the organic nature of doing it live is better. But then other times, like, we don't necessarily have the time to test it out and do multiple iterations of it live. Like, we do sometimes, because we do live shows like, we do the same set of stories multiple times over the course of a month, and you'll see it evolving. And like, you know, we have a very, very friendly crowd in the Harbour Bar, which is usually where we do the first Wednesday of every month, and they are very tolerant of our slip-ups when we kind of go in like that. And I think it kind of works in that atmosphere. But it allows us to find those moments in the story and find those changes and find those bits and those beats. So that was like, that really highlighted for me as well when I was doing it, the how vital that part of it is.
Yeah, and I guess like we'll talk to Oisin, hopefully, if he can get good enough reception in terms of the musicality aspect of it, because he found it really difficult to put music onto it and find and feel the beats out of this one as well. But we'll park that for a moment, because I guess whatever about like the rehearsal process or the lack thereof sometimes, I think that comes with the fact that we can do that and have done so many of the stories at such like performance level that once we get a new one, I know Ru doesn't like being thrown totally in the deep end without a prep, without without something. And of course, it depends always on the story. And this story is mental. Let's face it, it's bonkers. It starts off with a dream that Fionn McCool has of war coming, or a giant cat coming and wreaking doom on the nation. And a woman comes and asks Fionn McCool for protection and says, I've been bound, I have a geis on me, never to break servitude for Tailc son of Treon, and I've been running away from him because he's a cat, basically. And can you protect me? No king in the world has ever protected me. I'm asking you to save me from this monster. Now, I didn't know what to make of that initially at all.
She wasn't under a geis in the original story.
Sorry.
That's a thing that we put in, because like, and this is, I think, a conversation kind of worth having a little bit about Lady Gregory, and I don't think this is necessarily like her fault. I have huge time for the work that she put in collecting and collating these stories, but she was very much a product of her culture and her time. And that means that a lot of the time when you were working from her as a source, like the example I always think of is the story of Manya Morgore, where you get Cruthor MacNessa kills one of Maeve's sons in single combat, and it gets about 3 pages of action. And later in the same story, Queen Maeve of Connacht kills, in succession, 2 of Cruthor MacNessa's sons, and it gets 1 line. And like, the way that women are marginalised in those stories is like, it is profound and it is constant, and it actually makes some of the stories make less sense. And I think Tailc son of Treon is one of them, because there's 2 really important things that are like not really set up particularly well by Lady Gregory. The first is maybe not actually a Lady Gregory problem. Maybe it's just, you know, people who are not very familiar with Irish mythology might be surprised to see that Grania is Fionn McCool's wife in this story. This is the same Grania who was running away from Fionn with Diarmid, and who is Diarmid O'Divna's widow. She marries Fionn McCool after Diarmid's death. That's what Grania does. Now, we know that her daughter Éachtacht goes on to try and murder the man, but Grania forgives Fionn and marries him, which is interesting. That's a thing that happens in Irish myth. The other thing is that in the Lady Gregory version, you don't get a geis. This woman is bound to a man called Tailc, son of Treon, who she claims is a monster. But there's no real description of him being monstrous other than the fact that he's, you know, got the head and tail of a cat. And then at the end of the story, because I don't want to go too heavily into summarising it either, because it's such a complicated story to summarise, we'll just end up reiterating it all day.
Yeah, it's all good.
At the end of the story, in the Lady Gregory version, she looks at the destruction and feels that it's her fault and dies of grief, which is a really common trope in Irish mythology, by the way. If you have a leftover woman at the end of the story and you don't know what to do with her, she just dies of grief. It just ties that loose end up. But when we were reading
it also happens with fathers, and with like the father of the three sons of Treon, he just dies. Like, it happens with, like, it's like, oh, leftover, they die of grief. It's all very sad.
Yeah. No, it's not always women. It's just usually women. Yeah. So she dies of grief at the end. And yeah, that was definitely a bit that where we were talking about it, and it really struck me as being very kind of like the modern term being kind of victim blaming. Like, here is a woman who is fleeing from a monstrous man who she's terrified of, and she asks everybody for help and protection, and he's the one who comes after her and kills 1,000 men. She's not responsible for his actions. So we decided in that 3-hour conversation to put a geis on her, because Gasa are another trope in Irish mythology that are kind of useful.
But it was actually interesting to finally be on the receiving end of hang on, there's a plot point here that doesn't make sense, so we need to make it make sense, and will we just use a geis? Yeah. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's what was done, you know, that's how it was done. And it was like, oh, so she had a geis in her, and that makes perfect sense. If you break a geis, you invoke doom, and you call down whatever tyranny the planets have on you.
You definitely said the wrong one in the podcast.
Damn! I definitely said the wrong one in the podcast.
Yeah. We had a big long discussion about invoke versus evoke and what they both mean. The live stream cut out for a second there, and I'm not quite sure what bit it cut out, but just so people know, this will be going out as a podcast as well. So if the video cuts out, you can listen to the podcast version in a couple of days in case you missed anything. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Sorry, internet. Gerda for the murder. All right, well, okay, so tell me, it's Tailc and Treon, she's running away from him, and all of a sudden we have this great band of warriors, the Fianna, standing up against her, for her, you know, and 1,000 men die straight away, and then in her reading, another 1,000 men are sent to Cuid Macronan. I just, for simplicity, just kind of went, all right, let's just make it 1,000. But regardless, it was an interesting one, especially after kind of listening to Eddie Lennon during the week, where he kind of told a World War I story about a young fellow going off to war. I was just kind of reminded of how disposable young men are in these stories, and how, and like I know we say in the Fianna a third of them were band Fianna, and there were women in the Fianna as well, and it's important to remember it, but the disposable nature of young men in history as well as mythology is extraordinary, and something that I think is overlooked on a frequent enough basis, when you kind of, the glorification of war becomes about one man getting to the top of the whatever, but there's 1,000 men or young boys in frequent cases that have died. And like Eddie Lennon's story was about a young fella who was on a farm and walked off to sign up. He was 16, 17. His parents tried to get him back and he was off in France getting killed the following year. Like these tragedies of just young masculinity and the idea of joining the Fianna and being involved in this group, and just 1,000 of them died. That was it.
Yeah, and there's no kind of mourning for them, and there's no they get no eulogies, they get no names. And I think, like, for me, the big Irish myth about the disposability of young men and the tragedy of that and the tragedy of the war culture is the Táin and the Cuchulainn story as a whole, because that makes it be a tragedy. Like, the whole of the boys' troop are slaughtered. Cuchulainn dies as a young man. Even though and that's definitely kind of like our reading of the Táin, it's not always told as a tragedy, it's often told as a glorious war story, and has been used in the past as a propaganda tool to get young men to go out and die in war. 1916 Rising was very, very much about that. But I think that's a valid point, is that, like, these Fianna stories, often a high body count is just used to denote how cool a battle is or how badass the bad guy is, without really thinking about, like, oh, these are people who are dying.
Yeah, and I guess kind of like the survival of the tribe in a lot of kind of older cultures was dependent on, I'm not going to say male sacrifice, but essentially the disposable young men in the tribe that could be sent off to battle or hunt and die. Whereas, like, I guess that that was a big thing in these cultures.
That's a big thing in any patriarchal culture. It is built on men sacrificing their lives and women sacrificing themselves. And that's what a good man is prepared to go out and give his life to defend his tribe, and a good woman doesn't get to have any sort of personality or dreams of her own because her function is biological. And everybody is supposed to sacrifice for the greater good, but in different ways, and it allows access to different forms of expression and self-expression, and it allows access to different kinds of tragedies, but definitely the whole line about, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori is core to any patriarchal system. And you still have cultures like that today that very much glorify war and glorify sacrifice and glorify, like, the sacrifice of the warrior to defend, the lifestyle and the culture as a whole and the values of the culture as a whole. Like, that's entirely ongoing. But that's not a bug of patriarchy. That's a feature.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, it's just,
what it is.
For me, it's just shone a light on it. Really, like the fact that 1,000 men went and died, and then another 1,000 men went, and it's like, whoa. Let's just, like, back up and reflect on that for a moment. And I guess that's what these post-show chats are all about, is taking the time to actually just dig a little deeper into these stories. Because as we were looking at, again, that one source, it's interesting. You only get actions. Lady Gregory doesn't describe the internal dialogue, internal workings of any of it, and that's an Elizabethan style, and so you have to pick it apart.
That's an older than Elizabethan style. That's a mythic style. You get that in the Homeric Odyssey as well. There's no, you don't say Achilles felt sad. You say Achilles wept. Everything is externalized in myth. It's kind of one of the things about it. It's also one of the things that we always change, because it makes it quite inaccessible if you're not used to that style. Like, really it was the novel that gave us that kind of internalization. And to some extent Shakespeare, who we were talking about, like, it was drama, and it was like monologues and people talking about their feelings. that probably started on the stage and then went into the novel form. But yeah, mythology as a whole doesn't do that. How's it going, Tony? That's
Hey,
Tony.
is Tony online?
Yes, he is.
Class.
So is Oisin, who made a comment. And we might actually get Oisin into the chat soon. Or did you want to say any more about Tailc?
Yeah, I kind of just to wrap up on that final point of like the fact that we only had the actions to tell this story means we had to talk about it for about 3 hours to pick it apart and understand. And there was a lot of layers in it, considering Grania is involved in this pretty heavily and has this kind of like, she crops up at the start and at the end, and she is the one who shows pity on this woman who's lamenting for the death of her husband, and this woman keeps on Alba of the fair face, or the bright face. I think I interchanged those in the telling. Bright face, fair face. Bright fair face. But anyway, Alba is lamenting, and she goes off in this one and kind of goes like, if not for the treachery of Fionn, they'd have been grand. And Grania warns her. She goes, okay, I know you're grieving, you're fine, but let's not do that. Let's not blame Fionn, it wasn't his fault. She ignores her a second time. She says to the seat of Fionn. Grania's like, okay, that's fine, but stop that, please. Come in and have a drink. And a third time she ignores her. And at that stage, Grania's like, all right, I tried to be nice, but okay. And it was just a really interesting female on female little bit, because it just showed a woman having a kind of a lament for her husband and a tragic thing, while surrounded by a lot of men, and a lot of men died, and then this female perspective of going, okay, that's fine, let's meet sadness with softness, and then getting rigid and hard and annoyed.
I think it's a very Grania moment, and it's real like queen energy for me as well, where it's like, I'm going to give you space for your feelings and I'm going to acknowledge them as valid, but this is where the boundary is. Okay, maybe you didn't hear me the first time. This is where the boundary is, and I'm going to give you extra kindness. And then if you cross it again, it's like, boom, fuck you, die. Which is real, like, I feel like there's a real, like, Bridget is very like that as well. Like, a lot of these kind of powerful female characters, it's like, there is compassion, but there are really strong boundaries. And when you cross the boundaries, you'll get a warning, maybe, from some of them. You don't always. And when you cross the boundary too much, I just think it cracks me up. I think it's a great moment for Grania. And it's a great little, it's such a lovely intervention of her just being like, no, we're not going to kill this grieving woman because she doesn't know what she's saying. Oh no, she knows what she's saying and she's choosing to say it anyway? Right, yeah, no, let's kill her.
But it also gives her a lot of kind of power, and like you said, a kind of a queen-like position, because she's now married to Fionn, and to put her as the same character who's married to Diarmuid is just baffling until you kind of go into, okay, they were both grieving for the death of Diarmuid, and you kind of move on from that. And now, but she's a very strong character, and she's just referred to as this, again, doing character. She does stuff, and she's by Fionn's side, but we don't quite understand the internal world for her. So it's kind of an interesting one to tease apart and go, what's going on with Grania? But
I like Grania. I get Grania. She's yeah. I get it.
And
you don't need to tell me.
Never get women.
I know. I think it is hilarious how baffling you find Grania sometimes, because it's just like, to me, I'm just like, yeah, no, absolutely. 100%.
Huh? Come again? Cool.
Sorcha, explain Grania to me again. Okay, so we're gonna move away from Tailc, son of Treon now, and we're gonna bring Oisin in, hopefully.
We're going to talk to Oisin about Tailc, son of Treon, and music,
yes,
and
fair.
why he found it so difficult to put music on it, and to hear from Oisin about music in general and what he does with the Candle Tales podcast and how it differs to the live shows.
Okay, so I'm gonna join him into the conversation here, and it'll take a couple of minutes, so maybe keep saying what we're going to talk to Oisin about.
That's you literally blew my cover. Like, I was literally doing that, kind of hoping that you were just in the background. God damn it, sibling telepathy! Come on, like I was doing it. I was bluffing. Yeah, it doesn't zoom, just messes.
So we currently have a little black square where Oisin should be.
Nice. Yeah, he's a pit. He can be a pit of emotions.
Listen, all of us can be a pit of emotions, especially at the moment.
So many emotions. Don't know what to do with them all. I swim in a sea. That was my cure this morning. I was like, I'm going for a cycle. I'm not feeling very meh. So I cycled to the sea and jumped in the water. And there's Oisin. Yay! Hello, Oisin. Welcome to Oisin's little studio. This is where he makes all of the final sounds and edits on the Candle Tales podcast. This is his den, his warren. He's frequently confused and moving stuff around. But yeah,
we got a
Hello,
comment.
Oisin, how are you doing?
We got a comment there from Sarah Tully where she says a lot of Irish women these days are similar to Grania without the literal death, and it must be in our blood. See, I am not the only person who identifies as Grania and thinks that she's class.
I agree with her. You know, I think that's fantastic. I don't get modern Irish women either. So, here, I'm getting a bit of a buzzy thing going on.
There was a weird buzzy crackle from somewhere. It's gone.
That would be Oisin.
It stopped. Excellent.
It stopped.
How's it going, Oisin?
All right, Oisin. So, how are you getting on?
Great. Yeah, that last story was difficult for me as well. I couldn't get and after listening to you guys talking about it for the last half an hour and then working on it all week, it's definitely it's because we didn't do it live.
Yeah.
And and when I think about the amount of time we actually put into the live stories, we talk about them for hours and hours and hours. We really do put an awful lot of time that we don't necessarily treat as rehearsal per se. But it is. It's not necessarily we're not actually rehearsing exactly what we're going to do, but we're rehearsing how we're going to approach it. And I think with this Tailc and Treon story, we just didn't replicate that process remotely as we should.
Yeah.
And we eventually did.
Yeah.
And then it worked. It kind of worked. But after the fact, then there's still listening back. There's bits where I'm like,
But interestingly, I replicated my process with Sorcha in terms of how to piece the story together, but I didn't link that in with you. So as a result, you were left a little bit askew because the story changes with the music, and as we've always found, the story evolves nicer, and you find moments and you find something out of the story with putting music into it. So without the third piece to that puzzle, we all found it more difficult, I think, because we didn't have that. I didn't have that kind of flowing conversation with you. I just gave you a finished kind of story that hadn't been teased out musically.
Yeah, I'm gonna sound fairly kind of out there now when I say, but with the way I'm always talking about the musical hyperbrain, where they've actually managed to measure brainwave patterns that sync up when musicians are performing together or whatever. I'm fairly certain that happens in a lot of situations. They just haven't tested it or measured it yet.
Hang on, I know about musical hyperbrain. I know Sorcha knows about musical hyperbrain, and Ru does, and we all know that you talk about it a lot. But why don't you explain to the listeners what musical hyperbrain is, Oisin?
Okay, so a few years ago, I think it was Harvard did a study on the brainwave patterns of musicians performing, and they focused specifically and the reason that they did this study was because according to brain surgeons that they can actually tell physically the difference between a musician's brain and another brain when they look at it post-mortem. The musician's brain actually grows an extra little bit here to deal with the music section over their lifetime. Yeah, which probably explains.
Kind of chip in and tell us what that is.
Yeah, it might explain why when people have strokes, they're still perfectly able to perform music afterwards. I know of at least two people that one that had a stroke and lost the ability to speak, like day-to-day speech, but was still able to get up on stage and perform a set, singing the songs perfectly. no problem, but could not speak for about a year after the stroke.
Wow.
So whatever part of the brain physically deals with that it's different for the stored music and memory. Anyway, so that's a slight tangent on that one. And the next one is that so the hyperbrain was when they measured the baseline parts of the musicians in the room. And say a baseline pattern of your brainwave is that's right. And then just before, and mine's going like this, and yours is going like this, so we've got a slightly out of sync pattern going around. And then just before they were about to start playing together, it's like they just synced up. So they were able to measure this kind of telepathy, if you will, that happens in a certain part of the brain, synchronized timing. So when you hear about the chemistry of a band, that was always talked about, the chemistry of the band. The brain is controlled by chemicals. The chemicals control the brainwave pattern. So that literally was like, wow, they nailed that one.
Yeah, that is what that is. And I think, sorry, I think that definitely happens when we're all on stage together as well. Like, I know it hasn't been measured. I know there have been studies measuring storytellers and people listening to stories, and how they will get the same, the visual parts of the brain will light up if a storyteller is describing a visual scene, and if a storyteller is describing a physical action, the physical part of the brain of the listener will light up. So there's all kinds of really interesting neurological / telepathic things going on when you're storytelling, and then when you bring in the musical side of that as well, I think it all synchronizes into something really interesting. And you're right, actually. What I call rehearsal and don't like is running things and practicing them. Whereas what also is rehearsal
as per performance.
Yeah, as you're going to do it in a performance. Whereas what also is part of the rehearsal process that actually we do need to keep doing in this situation is the conversations that we have about the stories and about the music.
Yeah, and I guess you just reminded me there of a direction I was given when I was in college by Rob McFeely of Fragoli Theatre Company. Go on, Rob. But and I told you this, Oisin, before, but as an actor, as a performer, if you're describing something, if you see it, the audience will see it. But you have to visualize it first, and then they can jump in on your wavelength. And if you can see the ocean with the beautiful sun streaking across it, with going straight towards it, you're sitting on a rock looking at it, then they can see it too. But you have to see it first, and that's the only way you can do it. And then yeah, Oisin.
Which that's actually and we were speaking about this yesterday, I think. And that's eventually what I had to do when I was listening to the story and putting the music to it, was to sit there and visualise sitting in the harbour with a crowd and picture how they'd react to this whole thing going on. Because normally when I put the music to it, it's a start to finish. So I'll work it out, I'll listen to the story a few times, and then I'll play it as one track. So if it's a 15-minute story, I'll play a 15-minute track under it. And there's usually, it's not obviously 100% bang on or whatever, but it's there. And I leave those little bits in because otherwise it'd just sound like generated. But for this one, I kind of changed the rhythm as well, because I did it more because it was a really bizarre toned story. I felt like it had a really bizarre rhythm to it. It was just not, it wasn't as jaunty. When I heard the story first, I was like, yeah, feel the story, yeah, Oscar,
Yeah. Then it falls into it. Yeah, it fell into. It just kept on getting sad, and it's a mad story. But that's where the live thing would have brought it to, all right, let's take the piss out of it. But it was just without that feedback, and weirdly enough, without if you and I had been in the room together, I'd have gone, okay, we can't go into we need to have something brighter here or whatever. But when you're just sitting there with a recorder trying to get it through and pick it so that it'll be listening to, and there's a lot of detail. I don't know. It was a different process, but I guess in terms of all of the podcasts, because we've released some live recordings of our live shows as podcasts, and we still actually haven't really heard much feedback from people other than, hey, we love it. But what's your interpretation of the difference between doing a live show with live music, even if it's just one musician or a number of compared to the podcast musical scoring, and what's the big difference for you in that?
The big difference for me is that I really have to, like, I find the live shows a lot of fun. They're very interactive, and especially when we started to do the weekly ones, we really started to have a lot of fun with them, because we had a set, and then kind of turned into like, okay, so how do you want to tell this story this time? So it's like, okay, are we going to tell it happy? Are we going to tell it sad? Are we going to tell it fighty? Are we going to tell it serious? And and for putting the music to it, I have a kind of a library of stuff that I can pick from, and you can just float in and out of it. And we're looking at each other always. There's hand signals, there's gestures, there's a whole load of the kind of stagecrafty things that are almost subliminal to us now. And of course, then there's the feedback that you get from the people in the room. So I can see if something that I'm doing, I guess you can tell straight away if you play something for a story, and if you can see 5 people start to kind of nod their head or tap their foot or something, and you're like, okay, cool, this is a floaty, so everyone's getting into this. Or you can see if people are just kind of, okay, hang on, quickly change that into something else. It's not working. Plus, we have the option when we're doing a live show that if something isn't working, we can always go, hang on a second, and take a breath and rework it and just start off, because that's the beauty of that live experience. But with the podcast, I also try to make it a lot more understated, and it's just literally I'm trying to follow the tone of the story with a pulse. It's just the idea of what I'm trying to do is to just have this little kind of warm blanket there that'll just keep you in the story zone, and then the story takes everybody away. So once you put the headphones on, that's it. You're in the story, and it's gonna just keep it floating. So it's relaxing. It's interesting. It's easy to focus. If your mind wanders, it'll wander into the flow of the story and back.
That kind of answers Anna asked, each live performance can change with the storyteller. Oisin, how do you operate then? That's a good point, because we have a number of different storytellers that we work with, and so oftentimes if we have the same show, a different storyteller, we might tell different stories quite differently. So how do you find you operate then?
We tell the same story differently as well. Sorry. But
That's what I mean.
What I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
You
sorry,
know,
that's what I mean. Like,
As in, I will tell the same story differently the next time I do it. Like it's always different when we do it live. Sorry, Ash, I cut across there. Go.
I was just going to say that. But in terms of different storytellers and styles, each storyteller tends to have their own preferred type of rhythm. And a lot of the story are their own kind of flow. So I just, because we've been doing it for a while, like we just know which ones suit which people. And then for vocal tones, it's just a simple enough key change. Don't play anything that's going to conflict with the voice, so that the storyteller's voice is kept clear in the signal. That's the main thing that I do.
Yeah. Well, Ru is standing by, my housemate, and I guess he's another one of the core group of musicians that work with us, which we're very, very lucky to work with such amazing performers. I know you live with Audrey Traynor, the other the fiddle player of Candle Tales, or the fiddle player of numerous other extravagant, amazing things that she does. And we've been lucky to work with some amazing musicians. And when the music is too confusing or too elaborate, it tends to distract from the story. So in podcast, it seems to have gotten simpler and simpler. And like you said, I love that little blanket idea, just to leave a little blanket to kind of hold the story. And it, like in live show, I think it's an atmosphere binder. It's just like, it's something to fall into. But if it gets overly complicated, you only listen to the music and you forget about the words. So we're always navigating that thin line of trying to make sure that we're supporting the story, not distracting, not overcomplicating it.
Shout out to Richard March for his valued feedback on that.
Yes,
That is true.
because actually that's yeah.
He has given me some very, very good and extremely specific feedback after shows, especially in relation to, say, hearing deterioration in older people. Like I'm in my 40s, so that means that my mid-range vocal is starting to dip off. And that's the same for a lot of people that are getting older. The part of your hearing that's able to hear voices starts to get muddier. So in ambient noise, it's harder to pick out a voice. So the more noise that's around the voice, the harder it is to focus on each of the words. And Richard was a great gauge for that, because it was kind of, and even to the point where I've got a new hearing aid this time, and I'm trying to see whatever. It was actually really invaluable, because I kind of look at him and go, okay, if he can hear everything and he's happy, then I know that's the kind of the range to stick in within, and then experiment around that.
That's a good point. Yeah. To always, if everybody can hear you in the room, you're obviously doing your job right. If somebody with a hearing aid is struggling or had struggled before, we got a lovely comment there from Sarah Tully. Thank you very much. She thinks the music is the icing on the cake. It enchants the audience and transports them right into the story. That's kind of because it was always supported by music, wasn't it? It was always supported by music.
Well, Ru is the original Candy and Tailc musician. So this might be a nice.
Ru said he'd be here by now.
Might be a nice note to bring Ru in.
I mentioned Ru about 5 minutes ago, hoping that he'd actually come in, but
I think
he said he was going to be listening live, and
I think you need to be less subtle, Aaron. I think you just need to
come in here now.
A bit like with the you vamping while I was supposed to get Oisin on.
I also messaged him. I also sent him a text. Like, what do you want?
You also just
trying to write a message.
You wrote Ru in the live stream comments there.
I'm just doing literally everything I can do to get him in the room. I'm like, hey, there he is.
Hi, Ru.
You got the cue. Now I'm going to have to take this off. Hopefully this won't. Will this interfere if I take this off?
We might get an echo. We're not sure.
Okay. We'll see if we get an echo. Are we getting an echo?
Well, I don't know. Are we? Does anyone hear an echo?
I don't know. Are we?
Can
you hear an echo?
It sounds okay.
Sounds alright.
Sounds okay to me.
How's
it going?
Hi, people.
So, Ru, you were listening to us there.
Yep.
As the first Candle Tales musician, you jumped in pretty quickly into being just
The second ever show.
The second ever show.
You did your first show with no music and then not since.
And it was literally the worst. It was the worst. It was all I could hear was the silence.
You had no point of
Aaron
reference.
hated it.
I hated it.
You always hate silence.
I don't like silence. It freaks me out. And so I guess we've kind of had a lot of fun developing the music, finding, like, you guys have worked your asses off in defining the kind of the Candle Tales sound, I guess, over the years. And you've gone through a number of processes with that. Do you want to talk about what you find that? Oh, she's going to give us a bit, but do you want to give us your feedback?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's all about just laying down a groove, something to it's like it's that being like the live version of Oisin's like podcast Blanket, which is a lovely way of putting that. But like, yeah, it's just a groove and a tone. for me, you know, like it's something for the story to sit on top of, and keep it trucking along, and then whatever, and you know, something in it to indicate the emotional tone of the story, and that's it. It's pretty simple. It's just something for the story to rest on.
Now, you know what's not simple, and you know what's not completely simple, is our latest project. And Ru started this off basically in a really, really cute way, because he wanted to tell stories to his
my niece.
Thank you. Yeah. And he was like,
nephew.
Kleina, I remember. Yes, girl nephew. And that's really cute, because I during this time of lockdown, I was like, I miss telling stories to kids too. And Ru started the ball rolling with getting a short podcast for kids recorded, and we've set about kind of looking at what 3 seasons might look like, and we've a first season coming soon. And
we're nearly 4 episodes done of season 1. There'll be 5 episodes
of Candlelit Tales stories for kids, specifically for kids. No death, no sexual innuendos, which we left that at the door.
Some dark undertones, but they're subtle. They're subtle,
but also no swearing. That's important. We're YouTube regulations. And Ru has just found out a whole world of Foley sounds.
Yeah. Well, we started bringing them into live shows at one point. They kind of they were running strong in live shows at one point, and then we kind of moved away from them, I think. But no, I got myself a deadly little recording device, so I've been going around the place getting all sorts of like nature sounds and just creating sound effects and learning how to do that. Like we were doing the story of the Giant's Causeway, which involves the giant like throwing these big rocks into the sea. So Aaron got a little video of me. I was standing over the bathtub, like dropping this big wet towel from a height into the bathtub, because it was the only thing I could find that would make it sufficiently good. Like I was like throwing stuff into a pot of water before that and stuff, and it wasn't doing the trick.
The pot of water wasn't working. Yeah, it just looked like a blip.
Yeah. Blip. But then you can do all sorts of stuff like after you've made the recording to make the big epic sound that you wanted by like just like cutting out little bits of it and making a mad multi-track thing and like messing around with EQ and you can get these big epic sounds. Like in the same story, I've got a giant squeezing his way into a little house, into Fionn McCool's house, like, and he barely fits in it, so the whole gaff is like creaking and stuff. And I got it by like there's this little wicker basket in my room. I just got a recording of me just like pulling and stretching at that, and then I was able to make this big like kind of sound afterwards by just messing with the EQ and such a bit after and bigging up the bass and stuff.
Class. And I have to say, I've been listening. Ru's room is up the corridor here, and I've just been hearing like cackling fairy sounds, him going mental, adding little voices in. It's hilarious. I cannot wait to listen to them all in one go, because we've had a lot of fun. We love telling stories to groups of kids and schools, and when we get the chance, when we're invited by teachers. If you're a teacher, invite us to your school when they're open again. Anyway, if they're open again, and I don't know. And if they're not, you'll have these podcasts to give to your kids or your kids or your friends' kids or your cousins' kids or whatever kids there that want to learn mythology. We now have podcasts for those kids, because that's something that I think is important. And I wanted to do, and we wanted to select, a mixture of folk and myth as well, and have them fun, but have them told in the Candlelit Tales way. So that's exciting, and also a new kind of a project. So, Sorcha.
We have another question from Elna, asking you and me, Aaron and Sorcha, would you find you have to change with the music, or is it the music change first? I mean, in a live performance.
Okay, Ru, answer that question.
I would say it's a two-way dynamic. that often it goes like the storyteller will get all mystical in a moment and just do this and the music will come down, but like also like the other way happens too, and just like I'd like Aaron to like wished a little bit. Now I'm gonna take this down, and like this automatic effect of like
yeah. Or if he wants me to drum it up and dum. Yeah. Oisin?
Yeah, I remember at the very start when I was chatting to Ru about the music, he was like, "Oh, it's great. Aaron's like a marionette."
Yeah. It's just like
watch this.
He's play really loudly, and he's up to 10, and the bulls and the
Speed up.
Yeah, well, Derek, any one of our other musicians that used to play with us, he used to say that as well. Of like and it would be a case of like, if I wanted something to kind of be louder or be quieter, you can just do that with your hands. But similarly, like if you get a drive from the music, all of a sudden that instantly jumps you into something. And really weirdly, one of the first live performances in Stag's Head, that we were listening back to it, and it was a beautiful flow. It was like just we were all in flow. We were completely, everything that was coming out of my mouth was in harmony and rhyme and in sequence with the music that was ebbing and flowing perfectly, and it was just all lovely until...
We're not all in flow right now because that cut out.
Oh no. Well, anyway, that's ironic, because what I was about to say was Dara hit a bum note, and like a microsecond later I tripped on a word, but he knew that he hit the bum note first. And then, like, before I even heard it, I tripped on a word. I was just like, again, that's that kind of synchronicity thing that you're on about, Oisin.
And I remember the rehearsal. I think it was I'm pretty sure it was for Shadows of the Tawn, where I nearly had a nervous breakdown because you guys were trying to get me to end a sentence at the end of a bar. And I didn't know. It was like
that's so weird. I was thinking about that earlier on today. I always remember that as the day that the Haggertys had too much sugar.
It was the day that the Haggertys had too much sugar.
And these were going mental. We were all in the big weird buzz.
You were the
and then
one
we
who
tried to
decided
get
you were no.
freaked out. And it was hilarious.
Sugar is a dangerous thing and should be eaten with, appropriate, responsible awareness.
Somebody gave us, we brought in an Easter egg, and then someone brought in chocolate cake, and then there was, we had too much sugar. Haggerty's can't handle sugar, it's a thing.
I blanked that one.
Do you remember that one? Yeah.
You were stressed. That was the Bewleys room.
Yes. Yes. And I just,
that doesn't help.
I do remember that being a conversation about, like, just counting while you're talking. I can't count at the best of times. Certainly not while I'm talking. And like landing at the end of the sentence. And actually it was Oisin said to me afterwards, you do that anyway. We're just trying to get you to make sure that you do it this time. And I realised that I'm definitely influenced by the music as long as I don't think about it. Because if I think about it, it's like a centipede trying to count its legs, and I will just trip over and completely mess it up. But yeah, if I don't think about it, it's great. Oisin.
That's a really good point, actually, is the thinking about it and not thinking about it. I'm rarely thinking about it when we're performing. When we're actually in a story, I'm not thinking about it. I know, like, generally speaking, for music, you should have it rehearsed. And, like, if I'm doing any music stuff, like songs or whatever, that's, like, muscle memory, I practice them over and over again, and it's muscle memory or whatever. And for that reason, I'm not thinking about it. But with the storytelling, it's muscle memory for whatever progressions I'm playing, but the actual floating and everything else, that's dynamic. So it's not thinking, and if you think, that's where you hit the bum note. If I start what I'm doing, I'll start seizing up, and then that'll float out, and it's the uneasiness. It's like that thing where, when we listen back to stuff and we're like, oh, yeah, well, I don't know if anyone else would pick up on what that is, and certainly you always say it really well. It's like, they may not specifically know what's wrong, but they'll know something's out.
Yeah.
You know, something slightly out of, like, if it's a buzz or something slightly out or something slightly out of time. You may not listen to all of it unless you actually knew what it was supposed to sound like, and how could anyone know what that's supposed to be like, because we don't even know most of the time at the start. It's just a flutter.
Yeah, and hello to Celia Ham, who says, well, I would suspect that when you're on stage, the sync between the fabulous music and the stories has a fantastic effect. And it certainly lulls me into being able to tell a story better. I really struggle telling the stories in podcast, and it's become work. Like, it feels like work getting it done now. Work I enjoy still, but still work, you know, like, because it's less fun. It's less crack. Like, the live shows are just so enjoyable. And they're, because we're putting into practice all of that previously rehearsed stuff that we've put together, and our own synchronicity, and the fact that we've been working together on these things for years now, and have gotten very good at reading each other and knowing the signs, and having the dip and having the lift or whatever it is. Like, it's just, we've built that rapport up now, and without that in the podcast, it's really kind of and so that's why I'm really enjoying from home now, working with Ru on his kid stories, because we're kind of recreating that from home a little bit and having a lot of fun, and the fact that Ru has also figured out how to make crowd sounds with, like,
Oh yeah, they're fun.
oh my god, they're so much fun.
We were making the sound of a Tailc crowd, or a big crowd out of Tailc, and it's just like there's a groove happening that's like just a little bass line playing, but when it gets to the bit in the story where there's this young girl and a leprechaun passing through, and the Flad's in town and everyone's there, and then this line comes in, all these voices to create that
Different
effect,
layers.
Like, and it's gas crack putting those together
Going around my head all day yesterday, because all I heard from Ru's room was
in various voices, like la 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 1 minute, and then
all of the ranges. Listen, I think we're going to be looking forward to this podcast, releasing it soon. We won't put a date in it. It's a kids podcast coming soon. Season 1 is 5 episodes, and we'll have some interesting stuff to go along with that. Pamela, I love the podcast. Thank you very much for listening, but would love to catch you live one day. I bet it's a great time. I cannot wait to see you at a show, Pamela. I hope you make it. I hope we're able to have a live show soon, that we can all be in a room together. We are being hit by no gigs, so no crack. Everyone is having lockdown and not been able to have the live shows. Every musician, every performer is experiencing that, and that's a bit of a dose, and we're all a bit sad about it. But it is the light half of the year. It's beautiful day outside here anyway. I hope it is for you too. I hope you're able to go outside and enjoy yourself. I hope Bealtaine you'll be able to embrace Bealtaine in your own special way, and we'll be having live shows soon, someday, and we'll be chatting to you very soon. And I guess the last thing to say, Sorcha.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the things that we were talking about this during the week, one of the things that's really keeping us going is hearing from people, and hearing from you guys who are listening to the podcast. Like, we always hear creators say it, like, oh, it really helps when you like and you leave a comment, but actually, oh my god, it really makes us feel so much more motivated and so much more connected when we hear from people. So thank you so much, you guys who tuned into the live stream today and left us comments as we were talking, because it just helps us not feel like we're shouting into a void. And thank you so much to everybody who's listening to the podcast and like responding to the podcast, because it's like that audience feedback. It's a little time delayed, but it's still there. It means that there's still a connection going, and I love it and I appreciate it a lot. So thank you guys who respond and comment. And if you enjoyed this, please leave a like and a comment, and you know where to find us on Patreon, and you guys know where to find us online. And I think that is probably where we'll leave it for today.
And we're on iTunes.
We're on iTunes
And
now.
we're on iTunes.
Subscribe to the channel. We were a year late in getting onto iTunes, so if you are listening to this, subscribe and leave a review on Apple. That'd be great. Celia asked another question. Basically, the answer to that is yes. Do we do that when we get going? Do we get out of our mind and into the set of the whole show? Absolutely. You know, we end up living the story and being part of it. And I've been accused of being overly passionate. I can't help it. You know, it's just a thing. So
my favorite was people telling me what a great performer Aaron was, because he managed to make his voice crack at a certain point in a sad story, and I was like, that's not performance. He was trying not to cry, the big baby.
I'm a great performer, okay? I'm an actor. And I perform.
Yeah, the acting bit was him being able to talk.
You wept mythically.
Yeah, he wept mythically.
Yeah. No, and as I've always said, these stories are a way of a bit of a cathartic release, and a lot of it is just like getting into it and forgetting all the other stuff. So hopefully you're safe, you're sound, you're keeping healthy, and you're still in some way social distancing, but connecting nonetheless with others around you. So lots of love from the Candlelit Tales team. It's the first time all of us have been together like this. So this is...
Yeah, and thanks guys for joining.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. Salon.